All right. Today is Batman Day. I don't know if you knew that. Those who, I share it every year. It is always a Saturday. It's the third Saturday, the month of September. But you will not be receiving a discussion or a message on Batman Day, much as I would love to share one with you. It is, instead, our service, our message today will focus in on Constitution Day, September 17th. September 17th of every year is Constitution Day. This used to be taught in our schools. Prior to it being called Constitution Day, it was called Citizenship Day. It is now officially called by our country Constitution and Citizenship Day. It is right that we induct new members into our local body, our local, shall we say, fellowship and polity, because it is the concept of citizenship, membership, that our Constitution itself emphasizes. We have lost, as you know full well, we have, and as I've spoken of before, we have lost in our nation, in our culture, the importance of the concept of citizenship. It's very similar to churches who have jettisoned the concept of membership. Well, just come as you are, and if you show up on the regular, then, we might make a name tag for you and we might recognize you or not. But come and go, come as you are, whatever you like. There's really no rights or responsibilities to speak of. We really just want to swell our seats and put tuchuses in seats and magnify our ability to propagate the gospel. Well and good. If all the church was about was an evangelistic enterprise, but as I say every Saturday morning, our congregation is a community and a training ground and a learning center to produce members. What is members of any congregation? But citizens, by any other name. Nobody talks about citizenship anymore. Fewer speak of our Constitution, and when they do, they speak of what they know not. Because I believe very strongly in the principle of rendering to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God's what is God's. In a government like ours, as we will see, where we, the people, are in fact the government, and we are the ones who bear the rights and the responsibilities of government, then as believers, we of all Americans should have a clear and pointed, focused understanding of what our founding documents actually say. We spent July 4th looking at the Declaration of Independence, our national birth certificate, if you will. And today we're going to spend some time looking at the Constitution. Now, unlike some, like Emperor Palpatine here, who keep talking about our democracy, preserving our democracy. This group threatens our democracy. Make our democracy preserve. Our nation, I'm sorry there's such governmental and civic illiteracy out there. I'm sorry. I didn't cause it. All I can do is, to the extent that it's possible, is to correct it. That even a president, even a speaker of the House, even a Senate majority leader can call our nation over and over and over again a democracy. Our nation, with my respect to Emperor Asterisk here, is that we are a republic, we are not a democracy. Thomas Jefferson himself said, "The Republican is the only form of government which is not eternally at open or secret war with the rights of mankind." And as we get more and more away from our founding document, as we move further and further to what our leaders and our broadcasters and those who should, and I believe actually do know better, but have made it a strategy to obscure and obfuscate the actual government that we have here, the further our nation becomes divided and at war with one another. Because as Benjamin Franklin said, this is an apocryphal story, but I believe it's true. Benjamin Franklin came out of the Constitutional Convention. It had been ratified, or had been signed at least. States had to ratify it. And some old yenta waiting outside said, "Mr. Franklin, what form of government have you given us?" And Franklin famously replies, "A democracy, madam." "No, no." He replied, "A republic, madam, if you can keep it." Knowing how very difficult it is to maintain fidelity over time to founding documents. All that one needs to lose fidelity to founding documents is not to familiarize yourselves with them on the regular. This is what we read this morning in our Torah portion. If we are not reading the Bible on the regular, if we are not understanding God's holy principles and familiarizing, refamiliarizing, and then passing it down to the next generation, then the next generation after that, then it's very easy to forget or simply to be ignorant of what God's word says. And our nation functions the same way. Our founding document is what keeps the plumb line true. John Adams, speaking about a democracy, said, "A democracy never lasts long. There never was," and John Adams, all our founding fathers were great students of history, "there never was a democracy that did not commit suicide. It is in vain to say that democracy is less vain, less proud, less selfish, less ambitious, less avaricious than an aristocracy or a monarchy." Of course, if your goal ultimately is to drive our nation to national civic suicide, then it would make sense to keep pushing democracy and obscuring our Republican basis. And by Republican, I'm not talking about the party, I'm talking about the form of government. Franklin famously said, "What is a democracy but two wolves and a sheep trying to decide what to have for dinner?" A republic protects the right of the sheep, protects the minority from the tyranny of the majority, who will simply bully their way whatever they want to do. Alexander Hamilton, "It is of great importance in a republic not only to guard against the oppression of the rulers," oh, thank you, but to guard one part of society against injustice on the other part. That is how a republic functions. And you will remember that when it comes time to our Pledge of Allegiance, which most of us have said since childhood, we are not pledging allegiance to the democracy for which the flag stands. It is to the republic. So I don't buy the argument from those who say, oh, I didn't actually realize that we're a republic because of so much talk about democracy. If you've been to elementary school, at least through the 70s, I don't know if they're still doing it today, but every morning, through the 80s actually, the 80s, we pledged every morning. A republic is fragile, and the Constitution reminds us of what our government is, us, and what our rights are, which are not given by the government, but by God himself. The length of the average constitution in the world, 17 years. And the length of our Constitution, what we celebrate today, 235 years. We're obviously skewing the percentages way, way to one side. So if you add in our average of 235, then this number of 17, which doesn't exclude the 235, it includes it, is even shorter. There is no constitution that is as old as ours. The nearest in age, I think it's Norway's, one of those Scandinavian nations. And they probably are about 60 years younger than our Constitution. So nobody really comes close. And when we talk about church membership, congregational membership, just as with the Constitution and citizenship, we speak of rights and we speak of responsibilities. John Jay, who was instrumental in writing the Federalist Papers, letters, which explained what the Constitution was, the point, said every member of the state, in other words, every citizen, ought diligently to read and study the Constitution and teach the rising generation, not the minutiae of the law, but to be free, knowing their rights. By knowing their rights, they'll sooner perceive when they are violated and be better prepared to defend and assert them. Render to Caesar that which is Caesar's, and to God that which is God's. We as Christian and as American have unique responsibilities. We must live up to those responsibilities. This is the original document in the National Archives. You see the great, extraordinary words that open this document. We, the people. There is no document from any government around the world, never has been, and to this day never is, that begins with such a bold assertment of the people asserting their rights to self-govern. We, the people. And here is another page of the Constitution. Well, let's just break it down. What is the Constitution? I'm not going to spend time on the structure of the Constitution. We're going to get down to our rights. There are three branches, right? The first three articles of the Constitution. The Constitution is not a very lengthy document. You can actually read it. You can carry it around in your pocket. They have pocket constitutions, something like pocket tracts or pocket New Testaments that people have. I'm not equating our national Constitution with the New Testament, but nonetheless, I'm saying it's portable in the same way. But there are three branches which are designed to be co-equal. Whether or not they function as co-equal anymore is a different story. The Article 1, the first article is the legislative, and you'll see there's 2,268 words describing the legislative, the Congress. Article 2 is the executive. There are half as many words describing his powers and his responsibilities. And the judiciary, the Supreme Court, which is a third as many words as the executive. And you can see, in a sense, the weight that these three co-equal branches with checks and balances were designed to have in the Constitution. The executive branch was never designed to make law. So if, for example, a president wished to absolve the debt of college students, according to the Constitution, the power of the purse rests with the legislature. He does not have the power to do so. I wonder if anyone will call him out on his breach of the Constitution. Or are we so familiar with the Constitution being breached or ignored that this is yet another indignity that we will suffer gladly and just absorb it? The government, they're all a bunch of crooks, whatever, okay, it's all corrupt. We have amendments. Now, of course, there are other articles which deal with how to amend the Constitution and how to ratify the Constitution. You can read it. It's very easy. You can read it in an afternoon. It's very interesting to read. But the amendments thus far, and there are 27 of them thus far, the first 10 are the Bill of Rights, which we'll spend some time on. Then 12, 20, 22, 23, and 25, the presidency, including how to remove a president who is no longer able to perform his functions because of impairment. There is number 11, which deals with the judiciary and how one state can sue another. 17, 20, and 27 has to do with Congress and elections terms and if they can get paid or not, what they get paid. 13, 14, 15 establish civil rights and, of course, end slavery officially. 15, 19, 24, and 26 deal with voting rights in regards to race, gender, whether you need to have a certain financial backing, and the age that you can vote. 16 is the income tax, perhaps the most hated of amendments, followed closely by 18 to drink or not to drink, 18 to 21 to drink or not to drink. Those are the amendments that we have in a nutshell. And as these men gathered together, you know why they gathered together? Because after the Declaration of Independence, as the free and independent states fought for their liberty, they created a document to bind them together loosely, like a league of states. It's called the Articles of the Confederacy. Okay, that has nothing to do with Civil War. Confederacy as a confederation, like a league, like the Justice League. Like Batman gets to do Batman's thing, Superman gets to do his thing, Wonder Woman gets to do her thing. Every now and then they come together for something that is greater than what each one of them can handle on their own. So loose confederation. That became very clear the moment that any kind of international disputes began to arise, that would not do. And so they gathered together. Representatives from each state gathered together to update the Articles of Confederacy, except for Rhode Island, which wasn't interested in updating anything. But it was Rhode Island and nobody cared and they went on anyway. And what actually happened, when they got together in June, the end of May, they got together and they realized we can't just fix the Articles of Confederation are beyond fixing. We are going to have to create anew. And while the windows in this painting famously opened with the sun streaming, the drapes, even though it was hot in Philadelphia in the spring and in the summer, the drapes were closed because they did everything in extreme secrecy, because they didn't want the press to distort Not that the press ever distorts the workings of government, but they were worried that perhaps they might, and so they kept things on the down low. But it was a famously contentious meeting. They could not agree. What was the strongest point of contention? Proportional representation. And we still see this issue alive today. It has reared its head again. It's not fair that bigger states with bigger populations only would have the same amount of representation, each state getting the same number of senators as the smaller states like Rhode Island or Delaware or what have you. It's not fair. Virginia, New York, Pennsylvania, they had a problem with that. But of course, the smaller states had a problem with not being, with the idea of proportional representation, because if New York, Pennsylvania, and Virginia if everybody's proportionally represented, then the larger states would bully the smaller states. It would not be equal representation. It's a strong battle. Would they have one house of Congress? Would it be proportional? Or would it be representational to representatives from each state? As the Continental Congress actually had been a certain amount of representatives from each state. They were at loggerheads. They could not agree. And after 4 or 5 weeks of this, finally, Benjamin Franklin stood up. And at the age of 81, it's hard to stand and harder still to be heard. But nonetheless, when Franklin stood and spoke, everyone in that room listened. And he said, the small progress we've made after 4 or 5 weeks' close attendance and continual reasonings with each other, our different sentiments on almost every question, several of the last producing as many no's as ayes, is methinks a melancholy proof of the imperfection of the human understanding. We indeed seem to feel our own want of political wisdom. Some we have been running about in search of it. We have gone back to ancient history for models of government, and we have examined the different forms of these republics, which, having been formed with the seeds of their own dissolution, now no longer exist. We have looked at old republics, in other words, we have learned from them, we've seen what didn't work, but what will work is the question. In this situation of this assembly, groping as it were in the dark to find political truth, and scarce able to distinguish it when presented to us, how has it happened, sir, speaking to George Washington, who was presiding, how has it happened, sir, that we have not hitherto once thought of humbly applying to the Father of lights to illuminate our understandings? In the beginning of the contest with Great Britain, when we were sensible of danger, we had daily prayer in this room. That's the Independence Hall. In this very room for the divine protection. Our prayers, sir, were heard, and they were graciously answered. All of us who were engaged in the struggle must have observed frequent instances of a intending providence in our favor. To that providence we owe this happy opportunity of consulting in peace on the means of establishing our future national felicity. And have we now forgotten that powerful friend? I have lived, sir, a long time, 81 years at that point. And the longer I live, the more convincing proofs I see of this truth, that God governs in the affairs of men, and if a sparrow cannot fall to the ground without his notice, is it probable that an empire can rise without his aid? We have been assured, sir, in the sacred writings that except the Lord build the house, they labor in vain that build it. I firmly believe this. And I also believe that without his concurring aid, we shall succeed in this political building no better than the builders of Babel. That is to say, not at all. We shall be divided by our own partial local interests. Our projects will be confounded, and we ourselves shall become a reproach and byword down to future ages. And what is worse, mankind may hereafter from this unfortunate instance despair of establishing governments by human wisdom and leave it to chance, war, and conquest. Therefore, I therefore beg leave to move that henceforth prayers, imploring the assistance of heaven and its blessings on our deliberations, be held in this assembly every morning before we proceed to business, and that one or more of the clergy of the city be requested to officiate in that service. To which everybody stood and said, amen. No, they didn't. His suggestion, his request, it went nowhere, because in those days it was not the cultural practice for Brother George Washington or Brother Jimmy Madison or whatever to offer up an extemporaneous prayer. Prayers were formal, and they were offered by clergy. And since there was no funding for this gathering to hire clergy, they did not hire clergy to come and open them in prayer every day. However, what they did do, this was June, and just another week or so later was July 4th, and they asked that a local Philadelphia pastor preach a message on freedom, on liberty, and ask for God's blessing. And indeed, that is what happened. It is quickly thereafter that they were able to solve their differences and split the difference. Everybody got what they wanted. You have proportional representation in the lower house of the Congress, and you have the direct representation, 2 per state, no matter the size of the state, in the Senate. So in the time that we have left, let us read the preamble, let us read the Bill of Rights, and thereby remind ourselves of our God-given rights, not granted or bestowed by our government, but recognized by our government as already having been given to us. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, there's actually 6 reasons given as to why the Constitution is given here in the preamble. The first one is, in order to form a more perfect union. The Articles of Confederation, not doing a great job. So not to form a perfect union, that's not really possible politically. But a more perfect union than what we have going on, a stronger federal government and clearer protections for the people as to what government cannot usurp for itself, that we can do. A more perfect union. That's the first reason. To establish justice. Where does that come from? The Bible. Justice, justice, mishpat, mishpat, you shall pursue. To ensure domestic tranquility. I don't know that anyone can look at these United States today and say that we are a paragon of domestic tranquility. It is my proposition, my supposition, that insofar as we have left the Constitution, we have in proportion reduced our domestic tranquility. Next, provide for the common defense. One of the great reasons that we needed a national government as opposed to just a league of states is that invariably other nations will come against us, and we will need to protect ourselves as a nation, in which case a strong federal government would be very helpful. to promote the general welfare. This is number 5. Today we read this, to provide the general welfare. We misunderstand welfare as a handout, as a social safety net, and we take money from some of finances, support, we transfer from one group of people, and we distribute it. The government, at its own largesse, distributes it to another group of people. But no. The well-being, that's what's meant. It's related to domestic tranquility, to promote the general well-being of our people. And finally, that's capped off, which you would understand why domestic tranquility and general welfare and strong national defense will indeed secure the blessings of liberty, of freedom to ourselves, our generation, and our posterity, the as yet unborn. Not a popular phrase for some in our nation, our posterity. But nonetheless, our posterity is one of the reasons that the Constitution came into being. Anyway, those are the 6 issues. We do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. No nation under earth has ever, or to this day, has anything like the preamble that we have. Our nation is indeed unique in that it is a clear declaration of self-government by the people. It protects the natural rights given by God and enumerates very clearly the responsibilities and roles of government. The preamble to the Bill of Rights, by the way, when the guys in the room wearing the nice stuffy uniforms, suits, finally put their name on the Constitution, they had that wasn't the end of it. It wasn't like the Declaration of Independence where, okay, now we just distribute it. No. The Constitution had to be returned, remanded back to the states. The 13 states, 9 of them, two-thirds, had to ratify this document in order for it to become the national foundation of our government. Otherwise, we're stuck with the Articles of Confederation. Right? So, the people in the states had a problem with the Constitution as it was, the 7 articles. And they said there were no amendments, remember, at that point. They said, it's not explicit enough regarding our personal rights. It's certainly not explicit enough about our states' rights and our independent status as states united together. We're not the United Serfs of America. We are the United States of America. And the colony or the state of Massachusetts has a very different temperament than the state of Virginia. People are different in local municipalities, and they get to have their own local governments and state governments. And it is only joining in this area, so we've got to protect the rights of the states that already exist and make sure we enumerate the rights of the people that already exist so that there's no way that the national government could ever trample on the rights of the individuals or on the individual states. So the conventions of the number of states, having at the time of their adopting the Constitution expressed a desire in order to prevent misconstruction or abuse of its powers, good intention, that further declaratory restrictive clauses should be added, and as extending the ground of public confidence in the government will best ensure the beneficent ends of its institution. 10 amendments, Bill of Rights. Congress shall make no law. There are 5 issues in the First Amendment. Most people can't name them. You might be able to name one or two. No law respecting an establishment of religion. So the nation, in other words, cannot have a national religion. States at that time could. And certainly, these same guys who ratified and wrote the Constitution, they hired a chaplain, one for each house, to open each morning in prayer. So it wasn't a religion-free environment. It was that the nation could not have a national religion, because then what are you going to do? Well, what is that religion? If it's Anglicanism, well, what is going to happen to the Presbyterians? What's going to happen to the Methodists? What's going to happen to the congregations? What's going to happen to the Jews? Right? So they can have governments can locally have a religion, but a state religion, but not the nation. So Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. So the next time somebody wants to complain about a creche in the town square, ask them if Congress had made a law regarding the establishment of that creche in this little town. If Congress did not exercise a law regarding it, then they have no opinion to it. They have no reason to restrict it, no right to restrict, because of the second clause, prohibiting the free exercise thereof. If I want to put a menorah in my window, if I want to hang a Jewish star, if I want to hang or display a creche or any kind of display, or a Ten Commandments display, as we have the Ten Commandments are carved in the marble of every one of our Washington, D.C. national buildings, federal buildings, then that's perfectly fine. Right? Second, abridging the freedom of speech. I failed to see the asterisk that said, unless your business is called Google, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok. Freedom of speech is freedom of speech or of the press. And that goes for articles that for example, the New York Post published, that all of a sudden get memory hold because it's inconvenient to bring out information about some candidate's son being a drug-addled, hooker-addicted traitor to our country, because that might affect the election. Or the right of the people peaceably to assemble. And in the words of the famous newscaster Chris Cuomo, where does it say that the right of people to assemble has to be peaceable? You ignoramus. You rightfully lost your position. The right of the people peacefully to assemble, which means that the right of the people violently to assemble, as we saw in June of 2020 and the summer of 2020, in every city of our nation, should have been shut down immediately. There's no right to that. And to petition the government for a redress of grievances. So, if you are listening, Mr. Biden, or any of your friends, if I want to proclaim that the 2020 election was nefariously stolen, various states, I have every right to approach my government and say, stop the steal. I've had it then, and I continue to have it now as long as we have a Constitution, as long as we have the First Amendment. The Second Amendment, because I'm short of time now, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, as was demonstrated, by the way, by the revolution that we had. You know, the shot heard around the world, Lexington and Concord. It was precipitated by Great Britain attempting to confiscate the arms of the free populace of Massachusetts. Don't tread on me, as one flag says. As another from Texas said, come and take it. Being necessary to the security of a free state, this is why we have it in the United States of America to begin with, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Keep your hands off of our ability to maintain our freedoms, to protect ourselves, to defend ourselves from evil people or overreaching governments. Third Amendment, no soldier shall in time of peace, be quartered in any house without the consent of the owner, nor in time of war, but in a manner to be prescribed by law. So, if we were ever in an altercation, shall we say, and there were people who were fighting on my side, who needed to hide out in my house, it's not a violation of my right. I actually want them. I'm happy to give them food and shelter and quarter. Fourth Amendment, the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrant shall issue but upon probable cause supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. You may have heard recently that a former president had all manner of violation of the Fourth Amendment as the FBI descended upon him and not only ransacked, but they took a huge amount of personal documents, professional documents, whatever. The issue, as you've read, surely, is that the warrant was a general warrant. This Fourth Amendment protects us against the government, this warrant protects us against someone like the IRS saying, you made X amount of money this year. We have 87,000 extra employees and we need to give them something to do, so we're going to audit you. Well, do you have any specific suspicion of any wrongdoing? Not yet, but if we search, I'm sure we'll find something. This is exactly what the Fourth Amendment is designed to prohibit. A general warrant to come in and search can always find something, right? Some T not crossed, some I not dotted. In order to come into somebody's house, you need to have a specific warrant looking for something specific. If not, they are in violation of that person's Fourth Amendment rights. You cannot approach somebody at the airport and say, give me your iPhone. I want to look through your iPhone and see what I can find and see what contacts you have. No, that is a violation of the Fourth Amendment. I'm sorry today that one seems to be so egregiously ingrained in what our government is doing that I truly do fear for our future and certainly the future of the Constitution. Fifth Amendment, we all know this one. No person shall be held to answer for capital or otherwise infamous crime unless a presentment or indictment of a grand jury, except in cases arising in the land or naval forces. In other words, if you're in the military, you actually don't have as many rights as a private citizen, or in the militia when in actual service in time of war or public danger. Nor shall any person be subject for the same offense to be twice put in jeopardy of life or limb. That's the double jeopardy clause. Nor shall be compelled in any criminal case. This is why when President Clinton and his Department of Justice wanted to start arresting terrorists and try them in criminal court, he was giving enemy combatants more rights than our own military had. It's not gotten any better. To be witnessed against himself, that's the Fifth Amendment we know, nor to be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. You think about that and say, nobody's taken my house. My house is people have left me alone, the government's left me alone. Nobody's looking to take my house yet, right? But the very fact that the government can and does pass bills and give out money and print money, thereby reducing the value of what you currently have. It's a concept we know popularly as inflation. For the government to take official steps that they know are going to artificially reduce the value of our property and increase inflation is actually confiscating our property. Every time I go to the gas station, because the Keystone Pipeline and our sources of energy have been shut down, I am reminded that the government is confiscating my property, my wallet, without compensation, because the price, I don't blame it on the president or premier Putin. We know who the blame goes to. Mr. Executive Order. Sixth Amendment. In all criminal prosecutions, the accused shall enjoy the right to a speedy and public trial, as everyone arrested for January 6th so clearly knows, by an impartial jury of the state and district wherein the crime shall have been committed. So, for example, some of you are wondering, why did Durham's first case against this nobody who was involved in nefarious chicanery with the FBI and planting evidence and lying and why did he get off? He got off because he was tried in Washington, D.C. Now, in all fairness, that was a jury of his peers, but it wasn't an impartial jury. Nobody could argue that that jury was impartial. And if, God forbid, our former president was ever on trial, God forbid he is ever taken to Washington, D.C., because that's 95% hostile to not only former President Trump, but it is hostile to Republicans, period. So it would not be an impartial jury. Well, anyway, the district had been previously asked to change by law, be informed of the nature and cause of the accusation, and be confronted with the witness against him. So what is the crime that you have committed to be arrested without trial? I don't know. I haven't been officially charged yet. And here we are a year and a half, and they rot in jail, they linger in jail. To have compulsory process for obtaining witnesses in his favor, to have the assistance of counsel for his defense. Seventh Amendment, in suits of common law where the value of controversy shall exceed $20, inflation. Prices have gone up. So all events, basically, the right of trial of jury shall be preserved. And no fact tried by a jury shall be otherwise re-examined in any court of the United States than according to the rules of the common law. Eighth Amendment, excessive bail shall not be required, nor excessive fines imposed, nor cruel and unusual punishments inflicted, including no bail and releasing a murderer or a hardened criminal out and inflicting them upon the public where they can do more damage. I would call that cruel and unusual punishment. Ninth Amendment, the enumeration of the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. This is just a sampling, in other words. These 10 rights are a sampling of the rights you already have. So if we don't mention that the federal government actually has the responsibility or the right to do this, then everything else is retained by the people. 10th and final amendment in the Bill of Rights, the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively, or to the people. There is a reason that it took so long to ratify this Constitution. And that was because the states were very nervous about a federal government becoming too powerful and states having to bend the knee to the federal national government. Are we here? Have we arrived at the state at which the founding fathers were so concerned? You have to decide. As John Adams wrote, we're close here, and he would know, second president, our Constitution was made only for a moral and a religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. So I have a really great idea. Let's remove prayer from the schools. Let's give inordinate power to those who want to shut down religious expression, because that is going to absolutely bode well for the future of our government under our Constitution. JK, just kidding. Our fourth president, James Madison, the father of our Constitution, said, I go on this great Republican principle that the people will have virtue and intelligence. You ever see a Mark Dice video where he's interviewing people on the beach? You know, who's buried in Grant's tomb? Right? Who's the current vice president? I don't know. Who were the combatants in the Civil War? Right? Who is the Revolutionary War won again? These are people who have the right to vote, same right as you do. Men of virtue and wisdom, virtue and intelligence, select men of virtue and wisdom. I can point you to a congressman so intelligent from South Carolina, such a man of intelligence, that he was afraid that if Guam became overpopulated, it might tip over men of virtue and wisdom. Is there no virtue among us? That question resounds today. If there be not, we are in a wretched situation. No theoretical checks, no form of government can render us secure.